The buzzer had not sounded yet, and already a man in a navy tracksuit was walking across the pool deck to tell a 17-year-old boy he did not. In the water! His name was Elijah Carter for Lane 4, and he was standing with his toes curled over the edge of the starting block. Halloran Aquatic Centre, 200 people in the stands behind him, the smell of chlorine thick enough to taste. The coach reached him and did not lower his voice. He said it loud enough that the timers heard it, loud enough that the boy in lane 3 heard it, loud enough that a woman 3 rows up with a phone already raised heard it too. He said, "You have the wrong body for this sport, son. You should have run track." Elijah did not answer. He looked at the black line painted on the bottom of the pool and he kept his face still. What happened in the next 4 minutes would be talked about in that building for years. A record would fall. A room would go silent in a way that rooms almost never do. And a man who had spent his career deciding which bodies belonged in his water would learn that he had been wrong about the most important one to ever stand on his blocks. Before we get to the water, you need to understand the deck. You need to understand the man in the tracksuit, and the boy who said nothing, and a woman named Odessa, who had been dead for 2 years, and was somehow still the loudest voice in that building. Let me take you back. Elijah grew up 19 blocks from the nearest pool that would let him swim in it. That distance matters, so hold on to it. The closest water was a city rec centre with a pool the colour of weak tea, open 4 hours a day in summer, closed the rest of the year because the boiler had failed in 2011 and the city had never found the money to fix it. The pool he needed, the one with the lane lines and the starting blocks and the timing pads, sat behind a chain-link fence at a private club where the membership cost more than his mother made in 3 months. His grandmother fixed the distance problem the way she fixed most problems, which was quietly, and years before anyone understood what she had done. Odessa Carter had been a hotel laundress for 31 years. She pressed sheets in a sub-basement where the dryers ran so hot the air shimmered. And she came home every night smelling of bleach and starch, and she raised her grandson in a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building with she could not swim. She had never been in water deeper than a bathtub. Where she came from, in a town she rarely named, the public pool had been filled with concrete. The year the law said it had to admit everyone, and nobody had ever built another one. She carried that. She did not talk about it much. She carried it the way you carry a stone in your shoe that you have decided not to take out. When Elijah was 6, he nearly drowned in a flooded culvert behind their building during a spring storm. A neighbour pulled him out by the collar. Odessa did not cry in front of him. She waited until he was asleep, and then she sat at the kitchen table and made a decision. And the next morning she told him they were going to fix this thing, so it could never happen again. She found the lessons through the church. A deacon's wife taught water safety on Saturday mornings at the rec centre pool before it opened to the public. And Odessa traded her labour for the cost, washing and pressing the altar linens every week for 2 years so her grandson could learn to put his face in the water without panic. That is how it started. Not with a dream of medals, with a grandmother who refused to bury a second person in water. Elijah took to it the way some children take to a language they were born knowing and only needed to hear once. By 8, he was swimming the length of the rec centre pool without stopping. By 10, he was faster than the deacon's wife had ever seen a child move, and she told Odessa plainly that the boy had something, and that something this rare was a kind of responsibility. Odessa did not have money. What she had was a notebook. It was a hardcover composition book, black and white marbled, the kind you buy for $1 at the drugstore. She had started it the year Elijah began swimming, and she filled it the way some people fill a Bible with notes in the margins. She could not coach him. She did not know a flip turn from a false start. What she could do was watch and write and remember and ask the right people the right questions and write down what they said. She would sit in a plastic chair at the edge of the rec centre pool with that notebook on her knee. And she would write down everything the deacon's wife taught, and later everything she read at the library, and later still everything she pulled off the free computers at the branch on 16th Street, where she taught herself to read a stroke the way a tailor reads a seam. She wrote down stroke counts. She wrote down breathing patterns. She copied diagrams of the catch and the pull and the kick by hand, slowly, her laundress fingers cramping around the pencil, and she labelled each one in her careful upright print. Language is the one thing nobody can repossess. Not the landlord, not the boss, not the city that filled the pool with concrete. Knowledge is the same. Odessa understood that a thing you carry inside your head cannot be taken by anyone who decides you do not belong. So she put the whole sport inside her head, and then she put it inside her grandson, one page at a time. She had a saying, she had a few, but this was the one she gave him most. She would tap the side of his head and then tap the center of his chest, and she would say, "The water does not care what they think you look like. The water only asks one question, and the question is, can you move through me?" Everything else is noise made by people standing on dry land. He did not fully understand it at 6 or at 10. He understood it at 17, on a starting block, with a man in a tracksuit standing too close. When Elijah was 12, a coach from the county summer league saw him at a free clinic and put him on a team for the first time. That was the first time Elijah swam in a real pool, with lane lines that hung suspended in the water like floating fences and blocks that gripped your feet. He won his first race by a body length. He won his second by more. The county coach, a tired, kind man named Mr. Whitfield, who drove a school bus the rest of the year, started picking Elijah up on Saturdays so he could train in pools the boy could not otherwise reach. The bus was a retired short route the district had sold him for $1, painted over a flat white, and it smelled of diesel and the peppermints Mr. Whitfield kept loose in the coin tray. And Elijah rode it across the city in the grey hours before dawn with his towel rolled under his arm and his grandmother's notebook zipped into the front pocket of his bag. Mr. Whitfield did not talk much on those drives. He hummed along to a gospel station turned low, and now and then he said a single thing about the water, something he had picked up in 40 years of standing beside it. And Elijah learned to listen for those single things the way to listen for a coin dropped in another room. Hold on to Mr. Whit. He matters later, and not in the way you might expect. By 15, Elijah held 3 county records and 1 regional. By 16, college coaches had started writing letters. And it was right around then, the spring he turned 17, that he was invited to train with the Halloran Club for a single season, on a scholarship spot the club gave out once a year to a swimmer from outside its membership, mostly so it could say it did. That is how Elijah came to be standing on a block at the Halloran Aquatic Centre in a Borough team suit, 19 blocks and a whole world away from the rec centre pool with the broken boiler. And that is how he came to meet Coach Brennan. Brennan had run the Halloran program for 22 years. He was the kind of man who wore his certifications like medals and his opinions like law. He had coached 2 swimmers to the national stage in the early years and had been living off that ever since. The way some men live, off a single sentence somebody said about them when they were 30. He had a clipboard he never put down, and a way of looking at a swimmer's shoulders and hips and feet and pronouncing a verdict. And the parents at Halloran treated that verdict as if it came down from a mountain. The first time Brennan watched Elijah swim, he timed him. And then he looked at his clipboard, and then he looked at Elijah's body for a long moment, and what he said was not about the time. He said the boy's proportions were wrong for the water. He said it the way a man says a thing he has decided is a fact. Too much muscle in the wrong places. Built for sprinting on land, not gliding in water. He said it to the assistant coach, not to Elijah's, but he said it within earshot, and that was a choice. Here is what you need to understand about that verdict. The time Brennan had just clocked was faster than any swimmer in the Halloran program had ever posted at that age. Brennan had the number in his hand. He looked at the number, and he looked at the boy, and he believed the boy more than he believed the number. That gap, between the time on the clipboard and the body in front of him, that gap is the whole story. Elijah heard it. He always heard it. He had a way of going still that people mistook for not listening, when in fact he was listening to everything. He went back to his lane and he swam his sets, and he did not say a word. That night he told his mother only that practice had gone fine. He did not tell her what the coach said. He did not tell anyone. He opened Odessa's notebook on the kitchen table instead, the way he did most nights now that she was gone, and he read 3 pages of her careful print, and he closed it, and he went to bed. The notebook was his now. She had left it to him in the most literal way. She had died in her sleep 2 springs earlier, on an ordinary Tuesday, with the notebook on the nightstand beside her, and a library book open to a page about underwater dolphin kicks. Elijah had found her in the morning. He was 15. He had not raced for 4 months after that. The county coach, Mr. Whitfield, had not pushed him. He had just kept showing up on Saturdays in the school bus, parked outside Elijah's building, and waited, and some Saturdays Elijah came down and some he did not. And Mr. Whitfield never once said anything about the ones he did not. When Elijah finally came back to the water, he swam differently. Slower at first, then faster than before, and quieter than before. All the noise gone out of him. He swam like a person who had stopped doing it for any reason except the one Odessa had given him. The water only asks one question. So when Brennan looked at his body and delivered his verdict, Elijah did not argue. He had been given, by a laundress with a marbled notebook, an immunity that Brennan could not touch. He had been told, long before any coach could tell him otherwise, exactly what his body was for. Now let me show you the seasons, because the season is where the pressure built. For 5 months, Brennan coached Elijah without ever quite coaching him. He gave the other swimmers the detailed corrections, the patient breakdowns of their turns, the personal attention. With Elijah, he was brief. He assigned the sets and he walked away. When Elijah posted a fast time in practice, Brennan would note it without comment. And then he would tell one of the member kids, the ones whose parents sat on the club board, that times in practice meant nothing, that the real test was the championship meet, where pressure separated the swimmers from the athletes who merely looked the part. The other swimmers learned the temperature from the top, the way swimmers always do. A few were decent to Elijah. Most were not unkind so much as absent. There was one, a senior named Tyler Brennan, the coach's own nephew, who made a point of being near Elijah's lane when the coach was talking, who repeated his uncle's verdict in the locker room in a lower voice, who said the scholarship spot was charity, and everybody knew it. Elijah said nothing to him either. He folded his towel and he left. There was a woman, though, who saw it all. Her name was Carol Ann Reyes, and she timed meets at Halloran for 19 years. She sat in a foldings and chair of lane 4 with a stopwatch on a lanyard, the way she had sat for 19 years, and she saw everything, because that is what timers do. They watch the part of the race nobody else watches. They watch the swimmer who is not in the lead. Carol Ann had timed thousands of swimmers. She knew, in the way you know a thing in your body before your mind agrees, that the boy in lane 4 was faster than anyone Brennan had ever produced, and she knew Brennan knew it. And she did not understand why a man would look at a gift like that and decide to call it a flaw. She started keeping her own private record of Elijah's practice splits, written on the back of her timing sheets in pencil, because something in her did not trust that the official records would tell the truth when it mattered. Hold on to Carol Ann's pencil. It is the same kind of pencil Odessa used, and it does the same kind of work. The doubt came for Elijah in March. It always comes. The narrator will not pretend the boy was made of stone, because he was not. He was 17 and motherless and grandmotherless, and swimming every day for a man who looked at him like a mistake. One night that month, he sat at the kitchen table with the notebook and he did something he had never done. He took a pencil, Odessa's kind. On the last written page, beneath her final entry about the dolphin kick, he wrote 4 words of his own. He wrote, "Maybe he is right." He looked at the words for a long time. Then his mother came into the kitchen, a tired woman named Renee who worked the front desk at a dialysis clinic and loved her son with a ferocity she rarely had the energy to perform, and she saw the notebook open and the pencil in his hand, and she did not ask what he had written. She sat down across from him. She said, "Your grandmother washed altar cloths for 2 years so you could put your face in the water. She did not do that so you could come home one day and tell yourself a stranger knows your body better than she did." Elijah did not erase the 4 words. He let them stand. Beneath them, that same night, he wrote a 5th line. And the fifth line was Odessa's line, copied out in his own hand. The water only asks one question. That is the moment if you want to mark it. That is the night the boy decided not to believe the man who underestimated him. The biggest mistake is never being underestimated. It is believing the people who underestimate you. Elijah came close to that mistake, closer than he ever told anyone, and then he stepped back from the edge of it with a pencil in his hand at a kitchen table at 11 at night. The championship meet was set for the third Saturday in April at the Halloran Aquatic Centre, the regional long course championship. The biggest meet the club hosted all year. Scouts would be there. A regional record in the 200-metre individual medley had stood for 11. Years set by a swimmer who now coached at a university, and everyone expected it to stand for 11 more. The individual medley is the hardest race in the pool. 4 strokes in one race, butterfly, then backstroke, then breaststroke, then freestyle, and it punishes any weakness anywhere. You cannot hide in the IM. It finds whatever you cannot do, and it shows it to everyone. Brennan entered his nephew Tyler in the 200 IM as the club's best hope. He entered Elijah, too, because the scholarship terms required it, but he entered him in lane 4. The outside of centre lane, you give a swimmer when you do not expect him to be in the final mix. 2 days before the meet, in front of the whole team, Brennan made his last speech, and he eyed Eli without naming him. He said some athletes were built for the water and some only visited it. He said the meet would sort the two. He looked, when he said it, at lane 4. Now we come back to the deck. Now we come back to the buzzer that had not yet sounded. It was 11:40 in the morning when they called the 200-metre individual medley final heat to the blocks. The stands at Halloran held maybe 240 people that day, parents and scouts and swimmers between their own races, and the air was warm and wet and smelled of chlorine and the wax they used on the deck. Elijah stood behind block 4 in his borrowed suit, and he reached up once and touched the centre of his own chest, the way his grandmother used to tap it, and then he let his hand fall. That was when Brennan crossed the deck. He did not have to. The coaches were supposed to stay behind the line. He crossed it anyway, clipboard in hand, and he came to Elijah, and he said the thing he had been saying all season, except now he said it out loud. In front of the timers and the swimmers and a woman 3 rows up with her phone already lifted. Because something in the coach's walk had told her to start recording. He said, "You have the wrong body for this sport, son. You should have run track." The deck went quiet around them. The particular quiet of people pretending not to hear. Elijah looked at the black line on the bottom of the pool. He did not look at Brennan. He did not answer. There was nothing in his face that a stranger would have read as anything at all. Carol Ann, though, in her folding chair at the end of lane 4, saw his hand close once into a fist and then open deliberately, the way you open a hand you have decided not to make into a weapon. She had a stopwatch in that hand of her own. She pressed the reset with her thumb and she leaned forward. The starter called the swimmers to their blocks. "Take your marks. Here is what you need to understand about the next 4 minutes before they happen, because they happen fast, and I do not want you to miss what is underneath them." Everything Elijah was about to do, his grandmother had written down in a marbled notebook with a laundress's cramped hand. The stroke counts, the breathing, the exact number of dolphin kicks off each wall, the number she had copied from a library book the morning she died. He was not about to do something no one had taught him. He was about to do the thing a woman who could not swim had taught him from a plastic chair at the edge of a broken-down pool, because she had asked the right people the right questions and written down the answers and put them inside him, where no one could take them. The horn sounded. Elijah hit the water flat and clean, and he was gone. The butterfly is the first 50, and it is the leg where Brennan had said his body would betray him. Too much muscle, too heavy in the water. Elijah took it in a stroke count, 3 lower than anyone in the heat, his grandmother's number, gliding farther on each pull than seemed possible for a body that size, and at the first wall he was already half a body length ahead and pulling away. A sound started in the stands, the low involuntary sound a crowd makes when it sees something it did not expect. Backstroke the second 50. He flipped onto his back, and his underwater dolphin kicks off the wall went 5. The exact 5 his grandmother had copied from the book, open on her nightstand the last morning of her life, and he surfaced ahead of where anyone surfaces, and the gap grew. Carol Ann's thumb hovered over her stopwatch, and her mouth had come open, and she did not know it. At the 100-meter turn, he was a full body length clear of Tyler Brennan and every other swimmer in the pool, and the sound in the stands had changed. People were standing now. Somewhere a parent shouted a name, and it was not Tyler's. Breaststroke. The third 50, the leg that breaks pretenders. The slowest and most technical stroke, where a heavy body should sink and stall. Elijah's pullouts were textbook, were better than textbook, were the thing his grandmother had diagrammed by hand under a desk lamp until her fingers cramped. He did not stall, he stretched the gap. By the final wall, the race for first was over, and everyone in the building knew it. And a new question had taken its place, a question nobody had come expecting to ask. Was he going to break the record? The clock? People had stopped watching the swimmers and started watching the clock. The 11-year-old regional record glowed on the board as a number to beat, and Elijah was ahead of it, ahead of the ghost of a swimmer who now coached at a university, ahead of 11 years of certainty about which bodies belonged in this water. Freestyle, the last 50. This is where Brennan had said it would all come apart, where the wrong body would finally show itself, where the boy who should have run track would run out of water. Elijah put his face down and he swam the way Odessa said the water asks you to swim. The question that matters, can you move through me? And the answer came back off every wall of that building. He could. He could move through it faster than anyone ever had in that pool. He touched the wall. For a half-second, the whole aquatic center was silent. Not the polite quiet of people pretending not to hear a cruel thing said on a pool deck, a different silence. The silence of 240 people watching a number settle on a board and understanding, all at once, that they had just seen something they would tell people about for the rest of their lives. Then the board posted the time, and the number was under the record, well under it, and the silence broke like a dam. Carol Ann was on her feet with her stopwatch in her fist and tears on her face and her own pencil-marked timing sheet pressed to her chest. The stands came up roaring. Parents who had ignored the boy in Blaine Law 4 all season were screaming his name as if they had always known it. A scout in the third row had stopped writing and was just staring at the water. And Elijah Carter pulled himself up onto the deck, water streaming off him, and he did not raise his arms. He did not point to the sky or beat his chest. He stood, and he breathed, and he reached up and touched the center of his own chest one time, the way his grandmother used to tap it. And then he turned and looked, for the first time all day, directly at Coach Brennan. He did not say anything. He had nothing to prove with his mouth, that he had not just proven with the entire length of that pool. He simply looked at the man, and then he looked away, and that was the whole of it. The room didn't give him power. It finally stopped blocking the door. What did Brennan do? In that moment, you have been waiting on the man in the tracksuit. Here is the truth of it. And it is smaller and worse than any shouting would have been. Brennan stood at the side of the pool with his clipboard, and his face did something it was not built to do. The verdict he had carried for 22 years, the certainty in his own eye for a body, the whole apparatus by which he decided who belonged, came apart in front of 240 people in the time it took a clock to post a number. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked at the board, and he looked at the boy, and he looked at the timers, who were all looking at him now, and there was nowhere on that deck for him to put his eyes. He did not apologize. Men like that almost never do, and the story does not need him to. His consequence was not going to come from his own mouth. It was already coming, and it was coming in the shape of a woman with a stopwatch and a pencil. Let me tell you about the rest of that day, because the splash is never the whole of it. The ripple is. The video the woman in the stands had recorded, the one she started when she saw the coach cross the deck, was online before Elijah had finished his cool-down swim. You could hear it clearly in the clip. The coach's voice, telling a 17-year-old he had the wrong body for the sport. And then 4 minutes later, The same boy, the record falling, the building coming apart. The contrast did the work no caption could have done. By that evening, it had been watched more times than the club had members, and then more times than the city had people, and the comments filled with two kinds of messages, one from swimmers who had been told the same thing in different words, and one from people who had never swum a lap in their lives, but knew exactly what it felt like to be measured by someone who refused to read the only number that mattered. The club board met that week. They did not meet about Elijah, they met about Brennan. Carol Ann Reyes, who had timed their meets for 19 years and never once asked them for anything, asked to speak. And she brought 19 years of credibility into the room with her. And she brought her pencil-marked timing sheets, the private record she had kept all season, because something in her had not trusted the official one. The room was a glassed-in conference space above the pool deck. 7 board members around a long table, a pitcher of water sweating in the centre that nobody touched. Carol Ann did not sit. She laid the timing sheets down one at a time, in order, and she let them look at the splits, the dates running back 5 months, the same boy faster on every page. She said she had watched the coach take the fastest young swimmer the program had ever seen and spend 5 months trying to convince him and everyone else that what they were all watching was not real. She said, a program that is not a program. She said it quietly, the way the strongest things get said, and when she was done, she gathered her sheets back up, because they were hers, and she had kept them for 19 years of reasons, and she walked out and left the board with the silence she had handed them. Sometimes justice does not need to shout. It just places the right person in the right doorway and lets the silence speak for itself. Brennan was gone within the month. Not fired with a scene, not marched out. The board simply did not renew his contract. The announcement used the language of new directions and fresh leadership. And the man who had spent 22 years deciding which bodies belonged in that water was quietly made to leave it. He had made a boy invisible for a season. The institution made him invisible in a single unrenewed page. He became what he had tried to make of someone else. His nephew Tyler kept swimming and finished his senior season and was, the narrator will tell you plainly, never cruel to anyone in a locker room again. Because he had watched what cruelty cost in real time, and it had frightened something honest awake in him. That is not redemption. It is just a young man learning early what some men never learn at all. Carol Ann was asked by the board after Brennan left to help choose the next coach. A woman who had sat in a folding chair at the end of lane 4 for 19 years was finally asked her opinion about the water, and she gave it. And the program they built that next year was a different kind of program, one that timed every swimmer the same and read the number before it read the body. And Elijah. The letters that had been a trickle became a flood. Not because of the video, though the video did not hurt. Because of the time. A regional record in the 200 IM does not care how many people watched it fall. College coaches who had written polite letters in the fall wrote urgent ones in the spring. By summer he had chosen a university with a pool he could have lived in, on a scholarship that covered everything, and he had committed on the condition the program let him keep training the way his grandmother had taught him. Low stroke, count, exact dolphin kicks, the whole fall sport she had put inside his head from a plastic chair. He took the notebook with him when he left. The marbled composition book. The dollar drugstore cover gone soft at the corners from handling, Odessa's upright print filling it page after page, the dolphin kick diagram she had drawn the morning she died, his own 4 words on the last page, maybe he is right, and beneath them the line he had copied in answer. He did not throw the 4 words away, he kept them. He told only one person years later why he kept them, and what he said was that the 4 words were the most important thing in the book because they were the proof that he had stood at the edge of believing the man and had chosen, with a pencil, not to step off. There is a thing they do now at the Halloran Aquatic Centre, a small thing, and it is the last image I want to leave you with. The board, the year after Brennan left, started a Saturday morning program. Before the club opens to its members, the pool is given over for 2 hours to kids from outside the membership, Kids from the parts of the city where the pools were filled with concrete or left to rot when the boiler failed. Kids 19 blocks from any water that would have them. The deacon's wife, who first taught Elijah to put his face in the water, teaches there now, and the program has a name, and the name is the Odessa Carter Saturday Swim. There is a plaque by the door. It does not have Elijah's record on it, though the record is real and still stands. It has a woman's name, a laundress who pressed sheets for 31 years and never swam a stroke in her. Life, and beneath the name, in plain letters, the only thing she ever wanted her grandson to know. The water does not care what they think you look like. The water only asks one question. On the morning the plaque went up, Elijah came home from his university to see it. He did not make a speech. He stood by the door in the warm chlorine air, with the Saturday kids splashing in the shallow end behind him. And he reached up and put 2 fingers on his grandmother's name, the way she used to tap the side of his head and the center of his chest. And he held them there a moment, and then he let his hand fall, and he went to watch the children swim. Now let me say the part that is for you, because this was never only a story about a boy in a pool. Somewhere right now, someone is standing in front of a person with a clipboard and a verdict. A person who has looked at the outside of them, the body, the uniform, the address, the shape of a name, and decided they already know what is inside. And that person with the clipboard has real power, the power to assign the lane, to withhold the attention, to say out loud which bodies belong. That power is real, and the story will not pretend it is not. Here, though, is what the story knows that the clipboard does not. The verdict on the outside of you is not the number underneath. The people who measure you by the wrong question will always be surprised by the answer to the right one. They were not lying to you when they said you did not belong. They were doing something worse and more ordinary. They were reading the wrong page. So if you are the boy on the block today, the one being told you have the wrong body, the wrong background, the wrong shape for the room you are standing in, hold on to the only question that has ever mattered, the one a laundress gave a frightened 6-year-old at the edge of a tea-coloured pool. Not what do they think you look like. Can you move through the water? Everything else is noise made by people standing on dry land. I want to ask you something before you go, and I want you to actually sit with it, not just scroll past. Who put the notebook in your hands? Who taught you the thing nobody can repossess? The thing that lives in your head where no coach and no boss and no city with a bag of concrete can ever reach it. Say their name to yourself right now. And then ask yourself the harder thing. Whose hands are you going to put the notebook into next? If this story sat somewhere real in you, sit with it a moment longer before you move on, and carry it to the next person who needs to hear that the water only ever asks one question. That is how a thing like this stays alive. Not in a record on a board, in the next pair of hands.